wonder from down under!
Capcom versus SNK. Millennium Fight 2000.
Capcom versus SNK. Millennium Fight 2000.
Released in arcades in the year 2000 for Sega's Naomi board, and later ported to the Sega Dreamcast later in the year, Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000 is the first of two fighting games developed by Capcom, which features their own synonymous characters from the likes of Street Fighter and Darkstalkers, going up against the characters from SNK series such as King of Fighters and Samurai Showdown. In the 90s, Capcom and SNK were both juggernauts in the arcade industry, especially as far as fighting games were concerned, putting out classic after classic in the genre, in the midst of which they established many of the genre's iconic rules and tropes, and also developed an ever-growing list of iconic characters with each new game. Their rivalry in the market was comparable to Nintendo and Sega's home console wars of the time, and as their most iconic characters had their landmark crossover title, so too would people want to see Capcom and SNK's characters meet up in their home turfs. SNK would actually be the first to make a move in this regard, releasing two crossover titles with Capcom in 1999 for their Neo Geo Pocket system, the first of which, Match of the Millennium, was actually a 2D fighting game befitting the characters included, and resembled SNK's own KOF and Fatal Fury offerings for the system, and the other, Card Fighters Clash, was a funky looking card game comparable to Magic the Gathering, and also had two separate versions for SNK and Capcom, much like Pokemon. With SNK having a crossover under their belt, naturally it wouldn't be long until Capcom had their own go at it, and the following year, they did just that, releasing one of the most important fighting games ever with Capcom vs SNK. The extent of its importance is exactly what I hope to show you as we move to talking about the game itself. Upon starting up the game, you'll immediately be introduced to one of its unique features, the groove system. The groove system gives you a choice of two fighting styles for your characters, the Capcom style and the SNK style, each of which features mechanics taken directly from each company's games. The Capcom style most closely resembles the game mechanics of the Street Fighter Alpha series. You are granted free meter chunks, which you can choose to spend a single one of for a quick yet weaker super, or you could wait to build up all the way for a really powerful super move. The SNK style resembles the game mechanics of KOF 94 and 95, which were also included in 97 and 98 under the name Extra Mode. You are granted a single meter to use, which you can't build up by using moves or hitting with them, but you do gain meter from getting hit, and you have the ability to charge your meter at will, and you also have the ability to dodge to avoid attacks. Independent of the groove system, in the console versions of the game you can select your double tap forward movement option in the game's option menu to be a dash, commonly seen in Street Fighter and early KOF, or a run, commonly seen in modern KOF. In regards to actual gameplay, the game is unique among Capcom fighters as it uses a 4-button control system like most SNK fighters, as opposed to their usual 6-button system. This doesn't particularly affect the game at all, as it still has the distinct feel of a Capcom fighter, but I do think it's an interesting quirk about it. Overall, the gameplay is quite strong. If you've played a Capcom fighter before, are used to the typical concepts of projectiles, DPs, hurricane kicks and such, you shouldn't have much issue jumping into this game. The groove system also serves to give the game a degree of customization to decide for yourself how the game should play. Once you get to the character select screen, you are greeted with the game's other unique feature. As with SNK's King of Fighters series, you are able to choose multiple characters at once to form a team for the match. Not satisfied with just including this system as is, Capcom chose to put their own spin on it, creating the ratio system. Each character has an assigned ratio number, which dictates the amount of space they will take up on your team. You have 4 spaces to work with to decide what team you want to use. With this in mind, you can choose, for example, to have a team of 4 ratio 1 characters, or you can go all in with a single ratio 4 character. It should be noted that the ratio number doesn't just affect how much space the characters take up, but also their health and how much damage they can do. This exists to balance the characters, as the number of characters you go into a match with will also affect how many rounds you can survive before you lose, which would put ratio 4 characters at a heavy disadvantage by default. Speaking of the characters, they are naturally a talking point for a crossover fighter. This game predominantly features characters from Capcom's Street Fighter series, including the likes of Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li and Guile, and SNK's King of Fighters series, which naturally also includes characters from Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting, including the likes of Terry Bogard, Ryo Sakazaki, Hyo Kusanagi, and Mai Shiranui. Overall, I think this game's roster is quite strong, and uniquely tied together by the ratio system. One may make the point against it that it pulls from a limited amount of series, whereas Marvel vs. Capcom 2 released around the same time and featured characters from many of Capcom's series, CVS pretty much just features Street Fighter characters, plus a bonus Darkstalkers character. SNK's lineup similarly features only one bonus character from Samurai Showdown, and the rest are characters that appeared in King of Fighters, though to be fair that inherently also includes characters from Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting. On the topic of the ratio system, it can be considered a flaw that ratio numbers are determined purely by character, instead of having a choice as to how much space the characters take up. This means that you are inherently limited as to what characters you can pair up with who, as you can't, for example, pair up Terry, a ratio 2 character, with Geese, a ratio 3 character. Evidently Capcom concurred on this matter, and rectified it for this game's sequel. Regardless, I can't in all honesty say that it's a true deal breaker for this game. Although most would consider CVS 2 to be the superior game to this one, there is a particular aspect of this game that almost everyone agrees to be better than its successor: the presentation. The graphical design of this game is among the strongest points of its presentation. The game has this really unique flair to it that stands out, and can be seen in the HUD and character select screen, as well as popping up for a flourish at the round's beginning and end. I can't quite put my finger on the word to describe it, but I distinctly associate it as an early 2000s era aesthetic. Whatever the word for it, it's clear to see the game has a striking visual appeal, which most agree even outshines its successor, Capcom vs. SNK 2. Outside of the graphical flair, the game's graphics are very good elsewhere as well. The backdrops are all in 2D and make use of impressive graphical effects to make them look more dynamic. Such can be seen with examples like the glowing fire effect in the Capcom stage and the spotlight shadow effect in the final fight stage. And of course, one must mention the sprites of the characters themselves. This game was one of Capcom's last fighters to use 2D sprites for the characters, and they were decidedly intent on going out with a bang. Both the Capcom and SNK characters received new sprite work for this game that lovingly updates them for the new Millennium. That is, the ones that did get new sprites. Indeed, a common criticism of the CVS games is that they reused art assets from earlier Capcom games, mainly Street Fighter Alpha. Whereas the likes of Ryu, Ken, and Bison all got new sprites, characters like Vega, Balrog, and Sagat weren't so lucky. And I don't think I need to mention the case with Morrigan. Still, while it wouldn't be nice if all these characters got new sprites, there's a few things I think should be considered. For one, While not comparable to a full do-over, the reused characters did receive used sprites in their same style to account for the actions they can do in this game that they couldn't do before. For another, the sprite reusage only affects the Capcom side. The SNK side has exclusively used sprites, by default guaranteeing at least half of the game's sprites are new. Besides, if it allows these games to have as big a roster as they do, I think this is an easy concession to make. Another noteworthy point of this game's presentation is the music. Simply put, I love it. With a solid mixture of music genres in display, from techno to rap, longtime Capcom composer Satoshi Ise provides this game with one of my favorite soundtracks from a Capcom fighter. But simply talking about it wouldn't do it justice. Have a listen for yourself of some of the OST's highlights. So, the game has good controls, gameplay, graphics, and music. All the ingredients necessary to make a good game, even a great one. But not necessarily an important and special one, as I've alluded to. So what tips the game over into meeting this standard? That would be the crossover aspect. Sure, it's obviously put front and center on the title screen that the game is in fact a crossover of characters, but it's not just a crossover of two series characters, but also of their styles. This of course can be clearly seen in gameplay with the groove system, allowing you to set the gameplay mechanics to resemble Capcom or SNK's most popular games. But there's more areas where the crossover aspect is apparent than that as well. The stage backgrounds are largely based on areas associated with Capcom and SNK series. The music fits both styles as well, which is further accentuated in the console versions, where you can swap to an alternate soundtrack consisting of songs from previous Capcom and SNK games. And of course, on this matter, I have to mention the game's artwork. Each of the game's characters has two sets of artwork done for them in their respective series' recognizable styles, each of which is used both on the character select and in-game to identify what groove you're using. The Capcom groove has artwork done by Capcom regulars such as Kido Nishimura and Daigo Ikeno, whereas the SNK groove provides artwork done by KOF's distinctive series artist, Shinkiro. I honestly can't stress enough how cool I think this is, and how much it helps to really sell the game's crossover aspect. It's also cool how the artwork is used in promotional material, showing the Capcom and SNK characters in the other series' respective art styles, and showing Ryu and Kyo in their own respective art styles facing off. Really cool and good stuff. Speaking of which, being a crossover title, CVS naturally takes the opportunity to show each series' characters interacting with each other, and it's definitely fun stuff to see.
Double replicate!
君の死に場所はここだ。烈風剣。ハンデだ。使えよ。後悔するぞこら。かかってらっしゃい。そらよ。黄金の蹴り拝ませてやるぜ You are dead man
Final round fight.
In conclusion, Capcom vs SNK is one of the best crossover fighting games there is, and a worthy addition to Capcom's fighting game lineup. A good thing it is too, as it, alongside its sequel and MVC2, is among the last sprite-based arcade fighting games they made. At least we can rest easy knowing they wanted to go out not with a whimper, but with a bang.